So in this video, we're going to be talking about the 4th century crisis, or how everything went wrong after the Peloponnesian War. So the 4th century crisis, what is this? Essentially, the Peloponnesian War ends at the end of the 5th century in 404. The Athenians and the Spartans take some time to shake themselves out of the aftermath of this, and then essentially everything has fallen apart. The Peloponnesian War becomes a war about who's going to be the hegemon, who's going to have supremacy in the Greek world, Sparta or Athens. And it turns out that when Sparta wins, none of the Greeks are happy with this, and the whole thing becomes a free-for-all. The leadership of the Greeks is up for grabs, but what's really the problem is that the idea has become there needs to be a hegemon, which is the real problem. The Athenians and the Spartans were in this contest for so long. This war that lasts for nearly 3 decades. It's longer than any war that anybody had any knowledge of. Remember that the Persian Wars only lasted a couple of years in 2 short spurts. Wars in general tended to last only for the duration of a campaign season. Here we had this massive, debilitating war that sucked the life out of the Greek world, ruining the resources, wiping out an entire generation of young men. And then on top of this, this war lasts for essentially an entire generation. It establishes that it is normal for there to be fighting over the idea of who is the leader of all the Greeks. This idea of a hegemon is not natural to the Greeks. The idea of the polis is that each polis stands alone, is autonomous and independent politically and economically. The whole idea of the polis is that each Greek community has its own ideas and its own sovereignty. The need for a hegemon arose initially as a part of when the Persians invaded, the Greeks naturally turned to the Spartans to guide them in the defense of the Greek world, but it really came into play when there was a need afterwards to fight back against the Persians, to go on the offensive after the Persian invasions. Sparta stepped back, Athens stepped forward, and now there were 2 potential leaders, and it became a permanent rivalry that led eventually to the Peloponnesian War. And now, the 4th century crisis, the Greek world is already massively weakened. Remember, the Peloponnesian War involves not just Sparta and Athens, but all of their allies. Almost the entire Greek world has been divided into Athens or Sparta. Everybody is fighting this war. Everybody is losing, money and men and equipment, and walls being destroyed and lives taken away, and silver and gold spent, and ships taken down. The whole the physical cost, and then on top of this, the emotional cost, the debilitation of being involved in 3 decades of war, the disillusionment in the nobility of, if you believe in Athens and see the terrible things, the atrocities that Athens commits in this war. If you believe in Sparta, to have Sparta win this war only because they've sold out to the Persians. All of this means that the Greek world is in a demoralized and damaged state, and then they spend the next several decades fighting with each other over who's going to be in charge. And so we have the Spartans being more arrogant, more assholey than ever, and yet at the same time the Spartans are just as vulnerable, maybe more so than they've ever been. The Spartans are still dependent upon the helots And not only that, but their warfare is stuck in the past. They believe in a fixed idea of what hoplite warfare is and how it is conducted, which is the same as it's been since the 7th century. With the leadership of the Greek world up for grabs, the Spartan image tarnished by the way that they sold out their fellow Greeks in Anatolia to the Persians, it now becomes feasible, conceivable to fight the Spartans and win. For Sparta to not be set on a pedestal as the great warriors of the Greek world. Meanwhile, Athens, casts out the oligarchic government that was imposed upon them by the Spartans at the end of the Peloponnesian War, and they fight to regain their preeminence as the shining light of the Greek world, the one truly great Greek city. And so they rebuild their alliances. They go to war, and they do everything that they can to restore their previous position. Even now, they are now weaker in population. They are weaker in commerce. They are poorer for all of the resources that they expended in the horrible Peloponnesian War. The new Athenian alliance is a milky, weaker shadow of what had gone before, and yet Athens is still a player. The real energy and fight comes from Thebes, which is determined to unseat Athens and Sparta, determined to rid themselves of this never-ending rivalry that's bringing all the rest of the Greek world down. And so Epaminondas and the Thebans go to war on behalf of tearing down the Spartans and shutting out the Athenians. They have a considerable amount of success, partly because they develop a refined form of the hoplite warfare based on the idea of the Theban sacred band, which involves matched pairs of intimately bound warriors that fight for each other, that have each other's backs on the battlefield. This is an extremely successful innovation, and the Thebans are able to eventually defeat the Spartans in an amazing battle that essentially permanently damages Sparta's position. But in the series of battles in which this takes place, the inspirational leader of the Thebans, Epaminondas, dies in battle, and the Theban initiative falls flat. And so what we have is the succession in which the Spartan hegemony lasts for a little while. We have an Athenian hegemony that lasts for a little while. The Thebans rise up and take hegemony for a little while. Nothing is permanent. Nothing is durable, because none of these people are really strong enough or have the respect enough to lead the Greek world after everything that's happened, and this leaves them open to domination by Macedon. So Macedon is a kingdom to the north of the Greek world, on the northern edge of the Aegean Sea, and it is both Greek and not Greek. Geographically, what's important about Macedon is that it's tribally organized, and so we have tribes that live in the central plain, the green area in the center, around the more or less capital city of Pella, at the very center of the map here. And then you can see that there are highlands around it. And so there's another set of tribes that are associated with the highlands around the central plain. Macedon has always been sort of divided in this way. It's always been a sort of confederacy of all of these different tribes jockeying for position, and so Macedon has always been kind of weak, always been kind of vulnerable, because these tribal chieftains are all in rivalry with each other, and the hill tribes are in rivalry with the plains tribes. So Macedon hasn't amounted to much until a series of events leads to the emergence of a powerful king that is able to unite the Macedonians, and this is Philip II, who we'll be talking about in just a moment. So the thing is, the Macedonians are, on the northern frontier of the Greek world, and they end up being the inheritor and the propagator of the Greek idea. So, and yet they're fundamentally not Greek. The Greeks themselves would have thought of them as typical barbarians. What it boils down to is that the Macedonians are wannabes, at least at the upper end of society. There are a lot of fundamental differences. The territory of Macedon is broken up according to tribes that are sort of spread out and sort of decentralized. Remember, these are the descendants of Indo-Europeans. And they've kept a lot more of their heritage than the Greeks, who went further south and established themselves as urban, centralized peoples, and along the model of the Mediterranean natives that they encountered. The organization of Macedon is fundamentally feudal. In other words, there is a king of Macedon, and the king has a relationship with each of the tribal leaders that is essentially personal, that is essentially a relationship of mutual obligation between the chief and the person who is the king. And so the general idea is that when you have a king and a lord, or in medieval terms, a vassal, the idea is that the vassal has a lot of leeway and a lot of leverage, because the king needs the vassals to, in order to fight his wars. The vassals agree to support the king in his wars and bring troops to battle in return for the king's protection of each tribe's land. That's the way a feudal relationship works. And so normally this means that the kings are fairly weak, because the tribes play each other out. None of the tribes wants a strong king. And so for there to be a strong king means that something exceptional has happened. A lot of practices amongst the nobility of Macedon are kind of un-Greek. Instead of sitting around in a symposium drinking wine, they go for war and hunting, and their cultural traditions include very non-Greek things: royal polygamy, drinking unmixed wine. In other words, at their parties they get very drunk and engage in drinking games, out-drinking each other, that kind of thing. They bury their dead, rather than cremating and so forth. But Macedon undergoes a great deal of trade with Greece, and there's a huge amount of interaction in goods, a huge amount of migration in terms of people, and a huge amount of emulation going on. Everybody in Macedon knows that Greece, that Hellas is the more advanced, more sophisticated, and let us not forget, wealthier set of nations to the south, cultural community to the south. And so, in order to move up in the world, it means to be more like the Greeks. And so a lot of people are speaking Greeks. A lot of people are imbibing Greek culture and goods and architecture and so forth. And this reaches a height by the time that we've gotten to in the 4th century. Philip II engages Aristotle as mentor and tutor to his son Alexander. He rebuilds Pelos according to the model of Greek architecture, and commissions Greek plays to be performed in Macedon, and so forth and so on. The patronage of Greek culture in Macedon means that you will find philosophers and playwrights and poets of the caliber of Aristotle, not necessarily just in Greece, but in the palaces and Hellas as well. And so here we come to Philip II. What Philip II is able to do is, you can imagine that the feudal relationship I talked about is very much dependent upon charisma. And so, if you have a king that people want to be loyal to, that people, that the vassals and lords, the tribal chieftains, feel is on their side, and is also obviously extremely capable, so much so that he can create a greater, more powerful, wealthier Macedon, then you want to be on board with that. You want to be on that wagon. And so Philip II is able to marshal and rally all of the disparate tribes of Macedon under his guidance, under his leadership, and draws them together in unity, and as a result is able to bring them direct and palpable rewards. First in taking on the tribes to the north that have been a constant problem, the Thracians and the Illyrians, and making possible not only the stability and safety of Macedon, but the possibility of further greatness. Philip undertakes a number of military reforms that make this possible. He reinvents the Macedonian military in its structure, in a number of ways that encourage merit, encourage loyalty. He does a number of practical things, like setting up a corps of engineers whose job it is to clear the path and build bridges and make it possible for the soldiers to fight. And he also equips the Macedonian phalanx, with a much longer pike, called a sarissa, which is up to 14 feet long. And this means that the phalanx is now engaging the enemy and inflicting damage before the overlapped hoplons can even come into play and smash them with the collective weight of the van of the phalanx. And so, in combination with all of these reinventions of warfare, in which he's taken the Greek model and leveled it up in a way that nobody has done before. Everybody has thought up to this point that the hoplite army is the be-all and end-all of warfare. Philip has taken it 2 or 3 steps further. And this, in combination with the immense loyalty of the Macedonians and the joy that the Macedonian lords have in what he's able to accomplish, makes Philip virtually unstoppable. More than this, he's able to establish Macedon as the power in the region, as Hellas is falling apart. So much so that when Hellas falls further and further apart, and more conflicts take place, Philip is able to step in as an intermediary, and in so doing, gain further and further influence, step further and further into Greek affairs, until he is directly controlling most of the Greek mainland, and is in a position to take over the entirety of Hellas itself. And so his expansion goes stage by stage. He defends and protects Macedon first by taking care of Thrace and Illyria, and then he moves into the Greek world, first through Thessaly, and then further south into Attica and the Peloponnese, until he manages to defeat all of the players and pull them into a common alliance. And there are a number of people all through the Greek world who are cheering this on. Not because they want to be conquered by Philip, but because they want to be in an alliance with him, because Philip's stated goal is to avenge the Greek world against Persia and defeat Persia. And the Greeks know that they are no longer capable of this. And so there are people even in Athens who are saying, Demosthenes stands up and says, we have to stop Philip. And then there are other people like Isocrates that are saying, come and let us be a part of this joint thing. Let us join hands with Philip against the greater enemy of Persia. And in some ways, this is what comes to pass. It just doesn't come to pass under Philip, because he is assassinated after having taken control of the Greek world, but before he can move on to the next step, marching into Asia. So we have to wait for his son Alexander to see how that plays out. For now, that's that.